Today I'd like to talk about instructional design as it relates to instructional strategies and innovative technologies. We've talked some about the technology piece of delivery throughout the semester, and we've tried a few tools. At the end of this presentation, I will go over some of the tools that I've come across that have been quite useful and tell you what I found in terms of their usability and accessibility. But in general, I'd like to start with talking about what instructional strategy is and why it's important, as well as the importance of understanding the appropriate strategy for the situation that you are in. To begin with, in general, in a broad sense, instructional strategy is much like a blueprint. It gives you an outline of how you're going to approach a problem once you've determined that there is a gap that training is appropriate for or education is appropriate for, depending upon the environment that you're in. And there are a lot of different ways to leverage technology in conjunction with instructional strategies, but everything is dependent upon the learner needs and their environment. For example, if you think about how we've proceeded during this semester, I've tried to listen to what you're saying your needs are and accommodate my lesson plans and information dissemination to the needs that you've articulated, that you may not have gotten certain material in other classes, or you may need more of something that hasn't necessarily been built into other classes. That, again, that's why those video journals are very helpful to me. I can take that feedback back to the program and talk about how this course fits or needs to fit within the overall curriculum. So again, it is always important to base whatever strategies you utilize or deploy on the learner needs and the environment. So when we talk about defining instructional strategy, we recognize that there are a lot of different types of methods, techniques and devices for instructing. And there are a lot of different types of learners. We've talked about the difference between pedagogy and andragogy, and the differences in those learners' needs. They come to the table with different experiences, different ways of understanding, different motivations for learning, and all of those things definitely matter, especially when you're trying to figure out which strategy to utilize. So strategies for instructing others, that is, how to go about the instructional process, include an overall plan which governs what the instructional content will be and the process. So what the instructional content speaks to is what will be taught, and the process is about how it will be taught. So for instance, in distance environments, the reduction of ambiguity to the greatest extent possible is a success factor in how well students learn the information. Students can certainly go out on the web and Google and reference and research on their own, but if the instruction isn't clear, they might spend a lot of time chasing things that aren't really what the instructor wants them to go after. So from my perspective, I can give you instructions, but when I get more than 2 or 3 questions on it, I have to go back and say, was I really clear? Did I try to convey something different than that which is being received by the learner? So there are 2 types of instructional strategy in a very broad sense. There's the macro instructional strategy and the micro instructional strategy. And when we talk about the macro, we're talking about an overall plan that governs a discrete learning experience, a specific learning experience, such as a course or a module. Now you can break courses down into modules. A lot of people like to do that. Sometimes it works out well. With distance environments, it seems that if you break things out into weeks, that seems to work out pretty well, although I've had courses that were broken into modules that span several weeks. Sometimes it's just a matter of the preference of the person who's delivering the course, splitting hairs, if you will. And with regard to macro instructional strategy, the way instructional designers plan to help learners achieve terminal performance objectives should be reflected throughout the entirety or the macro design of the course itself. When we start talking about micro instructional strategies, we're talking about a specific plan that governs each part of the learning experience, such as a unit or lesson within a course or module. In our course, for instance, we have things broken up by weeks and then further broken up into topics and then activities, which all lead to, hopefully, lead to gleaning the experiences toward the overall objectives that I've set forth in the syllabus. The syllabus is the larger macro document, and the assignment schedule, if you will, is our micro document, with each piece of each week being broken down into further micro pieces. So when we talk about macro instructional strategy, it's the way that instructional designers plan to help learners achieve enabling objectives. In other words, give them what they need so that when they're done with the course, they can take those skills and knowledge further and demonstrate them, perhaps in the work environment if necessary. So when we talk about instructional strategy and instructional tactics, this is a difference in kinds rather than degrees. Instructional strategies refer to things that are probably a little bit broader in scope and generally affect a larger group of people or a larger group of activities. And when we talk about instructional tactics, we're talking about more specific actions than strategies, and it would include any instructional activity that is undertaken to facilitate a strategy. So for instance, if I'm in the classroom and I'm teaching a particular theory, I might look at that theory from 10 possible different vantage points and think of 10 possible student viewpoints on how they would receive that information and be able to adjust my explanation or my example or my model to student understanding. Not everybody learns the same way, so the tactics are going to vary depending upon my learners. Likewise, if I'm in an organization and I'm training a span of learners who range from people who have 2 years of experience within the field and people who have 30 years of experience within the field, those are going to require different types of tactics, maybe even different types of strategies. So strategies can be broken down into tactics. It's probably an easier way to think about it. When you conceptualize instructional strategy, you can think about it two ways. The first talks about the philosophy of the instructional designer about learning and instructing, and this goes back to a lot of deep learning theory that probably you don't need at this point and you've probably heard so far, but the fact is that theory informs practice and practice informs theory, and in between all of this we have the research. So if you look at it from a very traditional pedagogical standpoint, you can apply a lot of different learning theories. The problem is, generally speaking, in a classroom environment, whether it's in a corporate training environment or in a K-12 environment, higher ed environment, you don't have a lot of time to develop on the learning theory. It's helpful to recognize different learning styles. For instance, my 6-year-old is a kinesthetic learner, which means he likes physical activities to keep him engaged in what he's doing. Otherwise, he sort of gets sidetracked and he may not remember the information. So kinesthetic learning helps him to plug in all of the things that he has going on to facilitate that learning, and that way he'll remember whatever it is he's trying to do, because it's accompanied with those sorts of things that he likes. Now, the second instructional strategy stems from the events of instruction and the conditions of learning. So, for instance, if we have some sort of a laboratory environment or a laboratory environment within an organization where there is a training room designed to simulate work environments, sans the danger, if we're in a production environment, for instance, people can somewhat simulate the activities that they are going to be expected to transfer that learning to when they go back to the job. And it has relatively low risk, and it should be fairly realistic of an environment so that it feels the same, it looks the same, and it's very grounded in muscle memory when people go back to the job with these skills. So the conditions would be the laboratory environment. The events might be the steps that the instruction takes them through to glean these skills and to develop the habits that the training is designed to instill.